get real about your home movie legacy before it's too late. How did you get into this, Rhonda?
We have a very interesting history. Our company was originally called Super 8 Sound in Cambridge, Massachusetts, and it was a company that 40 years ago really had this idea that you could do the exact same things that Hollywood could do with 35mm equipment using home movie equipment. And so I started working for that company back in the early 80s when the company was really just the type of company that was supplying equipment for colleges and universities. But the company went through a major transformation over the last 30, 40 years that brought us into the world where we're now transferring home movies more than we're working with colleges and universities, more than we're doing production work, that we still do some. And we had the opportunity to transfer the original home movies of a lot of icons in the entertainment industry and a lot of material that was being used in documentaries, such as the JFK movie, and that sort of gave me the opportunity to develop my passion for the fact that the home movie is the most organic form of physical evidence we have about life.
What's important about home movies?
There's so many things important about home movies, but I think one of the most important is that they're like a time machine. Home movie cameras were what people used to record sort of the defining moments in their family life. They would take them out for celebrations, for holidays, or maybe just backyard barbecues. And because of that, they're like a time machine. They give us the opportunity to look at a day or a moment in time as it really was. Physical and organic and very different than the way Hollywood may portray society and culture.
How are home movies different from photographs?
Well, I think that photographs are something you normally pose for. The photographer will say, smile for the camera, and we sort of fix our, skirt and our hair, and we smile. But in a movie, you're seeing 24 frames per second, and you're seeing the way a person's body language is. You're seeing their facial expressions. You can see things, it's almost like pulling back the layers of the onion, and as you pull back each layer, you're seeing the authenticity of a person that reveals a side of them that's, I think, very different and much more vulnerable than what you can see in a photograph that's posed for.
How can home movies help me to move forward in my life?
I think all of us have tapes that we've been playing over and over in our head. We have stories and experiences that we've been led to believe, either because somebody told us that's the way it was, or we wanted to perhaps hold on to something where we were the victim, or we make ourselves the victim. But I think when you really take time to study your home movies, who your parents were, who your grandparents were, how did your grandparents treat your parents? It gives you some insight into your experiences in life that are very different than perhaps you've been led to believe. And if you're really open to the fact that something on the movies is different than what you experienced or were led to believe, you can have an aha moment. You can have a breakthrough that really allows you to shift your focus and transform your understanding and move forward in your life, perhaps bringing you to greatness because you've let go of, you've stopped holding on to a belief that was no longer serving you.
Rhonda, how do I know what type of film or video I have?
Well, there are many, many formats, and oftentimes people are confused because they may have inherited a big shoebox from grandma, grandpa, or aunt or uncle, and there's all different kinds of stuff in it. There's big reels, there's small reels, there's tapes, there's all kinds of stuff. And normally what I tell people to do is that our ancestors normally did a pretty good job of writing notes on the boxes and cans. And so one of the things I tell people is that they can put the stuff in chronological order if they care to, or on my website, Home Movie Legacy, I have those resources for you. That would be one thing that you could do, is just go on there, and it helps you identify the different formats. But one thing I would really like to do is connect with people personally. When a client comes into my office, one of my biggest thrills is they come in with this treasure, this box of stuff stuff, all different kinds of things, and I like to sit down and have the experience of working with them one-on-one to help them identify what they have.
How can I see what I have if I do not have playback devices?
Well, we oftentimes think that we want to go on eBay and buy an old projector or an old VHS player, and that's probably the worst thing you can do for your aging media, because those projectors and those VHS players have not been maintained. What you want to do is come to a professional company, such as mine, Pro 8mm, that can take all those different formats and put them on a hard drive for you. And once they're on a hard drive, you can very easily plug that hard drive into your computer and view them.
What are my options for sharing my legacy with my family and on social media?
You know, technology now gives us so many great opportunities to share our media in ways never before possible. We used to think sharing our media was making a DVD copy for somebody. But the reality is, a DVD is just a low quality copy of your fantastic original medium. It's just as if you had a Picasso, for example, and say you went to Kinko's to make a copy of that Picasso, and you rolled the Picasso up and hid it under your bed to protect it, and you framed the photocopy and put it on the wall. A DVD is the same thing, because the last thing the studios want is for you to have a high-resolution version of their movie. What I like to tell people do is to create a digital master by having it all encoded and put on a hard drive, and from there you can do some really fantastic things. One of the things that I love to do is to create a family YouTube channel, and once you've done that, you can upload all that information to the internet, and now you have a living body of work that you can share with your relatives, because they can log on to that YouTube channel. You can make it private if you want, if you only want to share it with your family. You can start identifying who is who and tagging the people, and then you can have that big theater experience, because now all your media has been transferred and encoded in high definition. You can stream it over the internet right onto your flat screen TV. To me, that's a lot more exciting than just handing somebody a DVD.
When you think about some of the home movies you've seen, is there anything that you've seen in particular that stands out in your mind that was a special, memorable moment that really impressed you?
I've seen so many different things from, not only doing this for 30 years, but from all the different types of people we've worked with. And sure, it's exciting to see the home movies of the Eagles tour bus when they were on tour with Linda Ronstadt and the Hell Freezes Over tour. But it's much more interesting to be in that transfer suite with an individual, seeing their media for the first time after 40 years, particularly when they're looking for something and either they found it or they didn't find it. I think probably one of the most memorable moments I ever had was when a family flew in from India to have their legacy transferred, because they had heard that our company was probably the best in the business. And the gentleman had been there for 3 days in the telecine suite. He wanted to supervise the transfer, which is something we allow our clients to do. And there was a moment in the film where this older gentleman, an older Indian gentleman, was obviously on his deathbed, and his family was surrounded by him in his final moments. And at the moment he passed, everyone in my room started crying. And it was such an emotionally intense moment for me to be with this family, witnessing it was probably their grandfather, great-grandfather's moment, that we actually shut down all the machinery and had a moment of silence to remember this individual. And it's a moment I'll never forget.
You mentioned this moment that you would never forget. Tell me a little bit about who your clients are.
Our clients range from a person such as you who would walk in the door with a box of home movie treasures that your grandmother might have given you, to the biggest names in the entertainment industry. We have had the distinct pleasure of transferring the home movies of J.J. Abrams, Steven Spielberg, George Lucas, Christopher Nolan, Bette Midler. I think we've seen just about everybody but Marilyn Monroe. But for me, the moments that I just really, savor for are when the masses, the people who just walk in off the street, really connect to the idea that they have one legacy, the worst thing for me is when they say, I'm just going to bring it to Costco because it's cheap. Because I feel like you only have one archive, and when it's gone, it's gone. If you need a heart transplant, would you go to Costco? You want a specialist. You want companies who are heartfelt entrepreneurs who really believe that a legacy is worth saving for future generations. You want to give it the red carpet treatment, and you're honoring the legacy of the people who shot that film. And I've had people say that to me. They've come in and they've said, I know you guys are a little more expensive than other places, but these home movies were important to my grandfather, and therefore they're important to me, and he would be tickled pink to know that I was bringing them to a professional production company so our legacy could live in such a fantastic way.
What are the options of sharing my legacy with my family?
Just talked about that a little bit in terms of creating a home movie channel on YouTube or Vimeo. You can put them on little clips on Facebook. But here's something that I really love that is not always considered something that most people in the archiving community have a favorable opinion on. I feel that one of the really fantastic ways you can honor the legacy of your family is if you were willing to share a clip of stock footage. You know, I recently had a client who, just like you or me, had films of her family doing things that families did in the 50s or 60s, backyard barbecues, parties. And this particular client, it was a little movie of her and her fiance getting engaged. And it was just a young couple, so iconic looking of the 50s, laughing, having a great time. They put that footage up on a website called Getty Images, and it was picked up by Volkswagen. Now, it had nothing to do with Volkswagen, but Volkswagen wanted some really iconic footage of couples, you know, having fun in the 50s. And when I talked to the woman later, I said, how did your family feel when they saw that clip on the Volkswagen commercial? And she said they were absolutely amazed, and they were so tickled, and they weren't at all upset that we had taken our private family legacy and now shared it in such an incredible way.
What is the best way to find out the backstory of who's in the films?
Well, I always say get real about your home movie legacy before it's too late, and that means sitting down with the elders who would know who is who in your films, show them the films, and then take an oral history. It is so important because once that information is gone, it's gone, and you'll have to go to just extraordinary lengths to find it. So one of the things I did in my family is I went back to Boston to see my uncle with my 11 hours of home movies, and I said, okay, Uncle, you know, you're 83 and you are the person who knows more than anybody else about this footage, and can we take some time to really get great identification of who are these people? I recognize Grandma and Grandpa, I recognize certain aunts and uncles, but I don't know who everybody else is. So we started the process of taking an oral history. I videotaped him as we went through the films, and he was telling me who was who and what was what. And I love that because now I can even add his voice track of him telling me about the movies to what I want to do, which is make a little documentary about my family using the footage that I already have.
My family didn't shoot home movies, so what are some of the ways I can discover who else may have films of my family?
Well, technology now gives us incredible opportunities to connect with people from our past lives. You know, I know for myself, I have found old friends and relatives and neighbors of my grandparents on Facebook or their descendants. And so one of the things you can do immediately is take a look who is in your network of people and ask them, you know, hey, we were next door neighbors for 50 years. Are there any home movies? My family didn't have any, but I kind of remember your dad always being at those barbecues with a home movie camera. I would absolutely love to see what you have. And so you have to ask. You have to reach out. But there's something that I really am passionate about, and that is I want to create an online database. I want to create something called the Home Movie Legacy Project. and legacy stands for linking each generation's archive to connect yourself. And I think it's possible through technology, through face recognition, through tagging, that we can create an online database that someday you can type in somebody's name and find footage of that person. And that's sort of my really big dream, is to, instead of having stuff buried in archives, which happens so often, we donate our media to an archive or repository, because sometimes we have this mindset that archivists will take better care of media than we will ourselves. What happens is it just gets kind of lost amongst the reels and reels of film, and it never gets brought to a place where it can do the most good. And so I'm hoping that I will figure out a way to make this database come to a fruition so anybody would have the opportunity to find a film of their family, or perhaps the place their family grew up. And that would help them heal. Healing through home movies is a very powerful idea.
You know, some people, there's a lot of pain in the past, and you talk about healing. So what if you're afraid of going back to the past because it's so painful and there's some stories you want to let go?
You know, for a long time I didn't want to look at my own home movies. Here for 30 years I've been telling people to look at their home movies to get these breakthroughs and transform their understanding. But, you know, in many ways I had a very painful childhood because my mother was not present. She was present, but she wasn't present. And in trying to figure out who I was, who I really was, because I knew I was nothing like her, and I kept wanting to change her to be more like me because I was happy and she was unhappy, and there were just, you know, so many times where I made myself the victim because I would think that my greatness was because I didn't have the mother who I wanted to have, or I think could have inspired me to be all that I knew I could be. I realized that my grandmother understood that my mother had limited capabilities in terms of rearing me the way a mother should. She had me at 19. She and my dad always struggled financially, and I had a brother who was mentally ill and really sort of was the focus in the family. And so it wasn't until I really took the time to study my home movies, really take a look at who my mother was as a child, because I was lucky enough to have films of her in the 40s, and able to see the defining moments of my life captured on film, that I really had this kind of aha moment. I had two aha moments. My first aha moment was, well, my mother was always like this. She was always kind of depressed, and she was always probably suffering from depression and personality disorder. It was nothing that I had done, or nothing that resulted in the fact that she had given birth to a mentally ill child, or, you know, all the other things that had happened in life. And I also realized that all the love and support that I got from my grandparents and my aunts and uncles were because they knew. They knew who my mother was. They knew that she was not able to give me what I needed to be successful in life, and therefore they compensated. And I never really realized it. I never realized until I really took that time to do my own life review that the things that I'd been searching for all my life, in therapy, in, you know, trying to change my mother, in being the victim, were all in my home movies. Once I really took the time to study them and open up myself to the fact that there was some very powerful information in there that were revealing personality traits and family dynamics and situations that were much different than I had always been led to believe.
So rounding it out, what are the ethical considerations of doing this?
Oftentimes when you want to ask family questions of things you see in your home movies as physical evidence, you realize you may be opening up a Pandora's box. You may, in watching the home movies, discover there's a side of the family you never knew about, because you're seeing people that have family resemblances that are so strong that it just can't be a coincidence. You see a person who, as in my family, an aunt who looked so normal as a child but yet spent her whole life in a mental institution. And the more physical evidence you pull out of your family movies, instead of not only you getting answers, but you also have more questions. And so the ethical considerations are, you have to make sure that when you are going to that family member to get the answers that you seek, that you're not going to embarrass them or put them in a situation where they feel so vulnerable that it could further upset family dynamics. And so, while I think it's a fantastic opportunity to talk to your family members about evidence you gather based on things you see in your home movies, you also have to be of the mindset that you don't want to further alienate them or upset them, and you need to think about what you're asking and whether the time frame is appropriate or not. If you see a person looking uncomfortable, maybe it's time to switch to another question and go back to what you really wanted to ask them at another time.
Do you have people in the family to sign releases that will give you authorization to be able to play the home movies, perhaps on the internet?
If you are actually selling them for money, for commercial application, you do have to get model releases from all the people who are alive or their descendants if they're deceased. So in other words, for the family that sold that clip to Volkswagen, they did have to get model releases from every person who was in the frame. If it's being used editorially in a documentary, for example, or for educational purposes, you do not have to use model releases. The copyright laws say that anything that is used for educational or documentary purposes do not require releases. But my own personal rule of thumb is you should always check in with family members, because people feel very differently about this. And I think permission-based is always the best practice.
Obviously, this will help people to preserve their legacy. Final question. What gives you the greatest joy in doing this?
That the stories will be there for future generations. That 100 years from now, people will know how we lived, how we interacted, what was important to us, and that they can see how society and culture has changed over time from the extension of the personal's point of view and not Hollywood's point of view.
Fantastic. Very good.
You did a great nice job.
And I didn't cry talking about my family.
No, you held it. You told it. Yes, you have such great presence and
Thank
great
you.
energy.
You did a very good job.
I'm so passionate about trying to get this arting, and that's what my one great goal is.
Now, what do you do now full time?
We own Pro 8mm in Burbank, which is the company that actually transfers the film. So believe it or not, there are people that still shoot on old school movie cameras. Like, we work on American Idol every week. We just worked on Argo. We work on Everything Sunny in Philadelphia. Whenever they need to have an insert shot in a production that looks like home movies, they go to our company, because we still make the film, we rebuild the cameras, we have a lab, we process it, and we have incredible equipment that then takes that film into a digital platform. Because we've worked with on so many Hollywood productions, in the day we did every single episode of VH1 Behind the Music and MTV and Where Are They Now? We've done thousands of music videos. But these people who work in Hollywood already get it. They're like, oh, well, if you're recreating Super 8, what about my real Super 8? What about my home movies? I want my personal digital assets handled the same way as my professional digital assets. So we started getting all this work from all these Hollywood celebrities because they understood that their archive had value. You know, the George Lucases who say, you know, this stuff's going to be used in a documentary. We just finished Eddie Murphy's home movies, and there I was watching his tribute on television a few weeks ago, and there was the stuff we transferred. So it was very rewarding. But I'm very passionate about reaching the masses. That yes, our process is much more expensive than Costco's, but you are getting broadcast quality archiving that will live forever, as opposed to getting an unstable DVD copy that could melt or scratch. And if you do nothing with the original content, it will disintegrate over time. And we're also seeing so much stuff getting lost in these archives. It just sits in their basement. It goes from your basement to their basement.
Can you enhance the quality
Yes, that's what we do.
of a film?
Yeah. We have tools in our toolbox that are called color correctors. So it's like Photoshop. So we recolor. You know how like when Hollywood will say they've digitally remastered a film? That's what we do for home movies. We digitally remaster your home movies so they look better than the original.
Good, I got something I want to send to you to do that. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.